I'm Rachel Horgan. Join me each episode as I sit down with a guest co-host covering the latest business stories in the Seattle area. We'll read the news so you don't have to. This is The Weekly. All right, what is up, everyone? I'm back from Pride weekend. I had a lot of fun, perhaps too much fun. I think my voice isn't quite back to normal. I did perhaps overindulge on Saturday night, which I realized later that I purchased the Pitch Perfect trilogy the next day. So not one, not two, but three Pitch Perfect movies I now own after my night out. So interesting choices were made. But then Sunday, I went to the parade. We had Patty Hearn on, the executive director of Pride. If you are curious to learn more about that parade, I encourage you to go check out that episode, but really proud of her and her team. It was a fun weekend. We're recording this on a Wednesday, so by the time this comes out, 4th of July will have already happened, and that's what I'm working on for Seafair. If you didn't know, Seafair puts on the Gasworks celebration, South Lake Union celebration for 4th of July, and I'm handling all the entertainment. So I booked a bunch of bands and DJs and scripts and MCs and things like that. So I will report back, but currently I have a bunch of hula hoops in my car. The life of an event planner. The last thing I'll say before I introduce my guest is I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that Camp Social House has closed. Katie and Marcel own it, and we had Marcel on really early on in an episode. And it was just one of those places where you could come in and you'd always know somebody, whether it's somebody working or, at the restaurant, and it just felt like a safe space. And they even hired me and helped me out when I was unemployed for a bit. So I just wanted to say thank you to Katie, Marcel, and Camp for being a special place. They have sold it, and I'm not sure what's next for them. I'll let them kind of share that story when they're ready. But just want to say that. So now I'm here to introduce Ryan Neal, president and founder of Blueprint Technologies. Hi, Ryan.
How are you?
I'm doing well. So I mentioned I read an article about you from 2013. And in it, I don't know if you remember this, but you said that your favorite album was a Civil Wars album. Do you remember this? So I started listening to it yesterday and today because I forgot how good it is.
What do you think?
I like Forget Me Not. It's a good one. And then they're known for, I think Poison and Wine, something like that. The first one that they're famous for.
Yeah, they've done a bunch of really cool music, and it's a really cool story about kind of that couple that ends up getting together and making something absolutely spectacular. A couple of really amazing, talented artists, but then they end up breaking up and then they go their separate ways. And then I think that they've played with a number of different artists, including Taylor Swift, and they're really influential. It's really cool. They
were on an upward trajectory. Anyway, I read that. I was like, I think I'm going to like this guy. So, but a little about you. You have led this company for about 13 years. You're also the managing partner at Pendulum Partners, which is a private equity company. Prior to these roles, he was a managing partner at a law firm, an owner of an athletic club, and an owner of a windows and doors company. Quite the mix, my friend.
It's entrepreneurial ADD.
Do you feel like there's a through line between all of those?
Kind of. It's kind of the advice I give a lot of people actually starting out their career as they're starting to build. It's really about building skills. And so I, at this point, have a number of different skills that I've learned and acquired over a couple, multi-year stints in many different industries, and being able to see the patterns and the way that different business models work in a lot of different industries allows you to be able to do a lot of things in business. So even though they're kind of all over the place, there is kind of a common theme around entrepreneurship and seeing opportunity where there's challenges and being able to kind of work your ass off and be able to make something happen.
I agree. I mean, I think there's leadership, organization, customer service. There's a lot of similar things in a variety of industries.
Yeah.
So talk to us about Blueprint. Why start it? And what was kind of the motivation? How did that go?
Yeah, the motivation. So Blueprint Technologies, were a medium-sized data intelligence company at this point, but we started kind of a little bit of a frustration with the tech industry and the consulting industry, and a big portion of it. I'm not tech. I really don't like tech when it comes down to it. I'm pretty analog, like my record player.
So the CEO of a tech company. That's so funny.
Yeah. I always tell people I'm not really qualified to own a tech consulting company because I don't like tech and I don't like consultants.
Oh my gosh.
So we actually formed Blueprint basically to kind of bridge that gap between consulting and delivery, being able to actually like put your money where your mouth is, being able to understand the overall strategy of a company, but then also be able to deliver on it, hold yourself accountable to what you're supposed to be building, and then be able to show the results in the company at a really high velocity. And so that was really why we started Blueprint to begin with. It was kind of born out of the Microsoft ecosystem being here in the Seattle area. And now we've been able to expand all across the United States into Central Europe as well.
Wow, congratulations.
Thanks.
So my vision of it is a company wants to track, they're ordering X amount of candy bars, they sell X amount at this festival. They want to get all this data together to have a dashboard of it and help them order more efficiently or something like that.
Yep.
Is that sort of kind of right?
Yeah, from every scenario, I always try to simplify it. I think it's kind of a strength being not technical or not technology oriented, because we always try to think of things in very simplistic terms. People have been doing business and trying to sell things and be able to actually run businesses all the way back into biblical times. And, you make something and you take it to market and you try to sell it, and then you get money for it, and then you try to make more things. And it's the same thing around, you're talking about the Pride event. Mm-hmm. A big portion about how you guys and how the organizers run, it's a mainstay of the Seattle area. And, but a lot of times, people running the event want to know a bunch of information about the people that are attending, be able to customize and tailor all the different content and the different bands and all the different vendors and things to be able to tailor it towards the individuals who are going to be there. Oftentimes you have no idea who's going to show up, who's buying tickets, or who's just going to show up. And what we do in all those different contexts, either in terms of an event planning business, or it might be a manufacturing and oil and gas business, or it might be a large retailer, is we help companies be able to take all that data that's in all different formats, all different sources, and be able to actually get access to it and be able to actually deliver it to the people driving the business in a really effective way that are going to drive additional revenue and drive additional profit. Yeah.
And we've got a couple stories today that we're going to dive into your opinion on. So I think you'll have a good perspective. Before we get into that, one more question. Do you have an example of just like a fun data set? Like, I know you have a variety of clients. What was kind of a really interesting or unusual one?
Yeah, one of the coolest ones. So pretty unique scenario in that my mom always asked us, Microsoft is one of our biggest clients and they're one of our biggest partners as well. So they hire us to do a bunch of work for them. And my mom always looks at me and she's like, I don't even understand, because she owns a bunch of Microsoft stock. She's always had Microsoft stock for a long time. And she's like, I know you, you're my son, I love you. But why the hell would Microsoft hire you to do work for them, one of the biggest tech companies around? Yeah. And a big part of it is because, our approach is pretty unique and different. And so one of the coolest things that we've actually built is Microsoft hired us to build a showcase of its Azure and Databricks capabilities, its analytics capabilities for the National Geospatial Agency. So one of the biggest providers of data for the intelligence community around the world, but very much for the United States across all the different agencies. And so they hired us to build an engine, an application that analyzes all of the video feeds from the different CCTV, the different video capture systems at borders and highways and things like that, and be able to actually identify patterns of behavior and identify anomalies. And it was all around being able to help the intelligence agencies be able to predict when there was going to be mass border crossings for refugees, so they can send a bunch of people out there to help the refugees at the actual border be able to get across. Oh, wow. Things like border control and issues. So it's in the Azure Marketplace, and it's being showcased and demoed in all 24 Microsoft Innovation Hubs. Yeah. So those are kind of cool things that we try to do, is when we're able to actually solve a data problem in a unique way, and be able to build it so it's really, really usable and applicable for the users to be able to get an impact on the world or in microcosm. It's pretty cool.
Absolutely. We were interviewing the president of USA Fax, and she had mentioned, we talked about immigration specifically, or crossing the border, and she said that's one of the ones it's hard to get data on because they produce unbiased data. They're just trying to get the numbers, and they said that one can be kind of challenging. So there you are, fixing the problem.
Definitely.
All right, so we're going to get into their stories. The first one is a story about Blueprint, actually, and their new partnership with Sigma. The next one is we'll talk about this controversial B&O taxes here in Seattle. The third one is a local startup raises some money and they're going to compete with Salesforce. And the last one is Lululemon is suing Costco. So let's get into it. The first one, I'm actually going to have you try and explain this because there was just a lot of data tech words in it, but I know that there's a partnership between you and Sigma. So can you kind of help the listeners know what's going on?
Yeah, it's pretty cool. So Sigma is a pretty cool company. We actually interviewed the CEO down at the Databricks Data and AI Summit. They actually won BI Partner of the Year for Databricks, and then we won the Unity Catalog Partner of the Year, which means they are the number one BI partner for Databricks worldwide, and we are the number one Unity Catalog Partner worldwide. For the non-technical audience, because I understand most people have probably never heard of Databricks, and they might not have heard of Sigma. Databricks is one of the fastest growing companies in the world that most people haven't heard of because it's a very technical platform, but it's one of our biggest strategic partners. And they make it super simple to be able to do all things with data analytics and data warehousing, be able to store your data, get access to it, and then be able to do advanced analytics and AI work on it. It's the leading platform out there in the market, and it's leagues ahead of any other company out there. We are the partner that helps companies be able to do governance, be able to actually make sure the right people are accessing data, the right people, the people who are not supposed to access data don't access data, and all things end to end across the entire company ecosystem. Sigma is really cool because they take a unique approach from a BI standpoint in that the traditional, we always talk about how the traditional dashboard is dead, like the old school way of being able to get access to a specific data source and then be able to produce a dashboard. That way of accessing data is, 5 years old, and in the tech world, that's dead. The new way of interacting with your data and be able to have, we kind of use the example of one of our clients is the CMO of a large retailer, and she's trying to impact a specific day part in the restaurant space. She's running campaigns and she's trying to really, really accentuate the brand power and be able to actually implement new product ideas and campaigns to be able to generate revenue for a particular day part. And she doesn't get the data, access to the data for the results tied to her campaigns for 30 days, which basically renders it useless, right? It's actually so old that it makes you make bad decisions. So she just goes on her gut. The other way, like one of our big local coffee manufacturer talks about how their inventory, the best inventory strength that they have is a good store manager because they just know their store. Well, those are also it makes your businesses really vulnerable. And Sigma is a really cool platform that allows those individuals who are not technical, they're not data engineers, they don't access the data, but they need the information really, really quickly to be able to get access to that information. So we're super excited about the partnership.
It's something not a merger. So it's just like you guys or is it a merger? What would just
Nope.
Partnering on and sharing information, sharing tools.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. We take our strategic partnerships very seriously, and that we end up investing a lot of money and a lot of resources towards making sure we understand their technology. And so what we do with something like Sigma is we go to market and we say, hey, how do we actually make companies be able to use your technology very easily using our people and our experience and our kind of track record doing that type of a thing.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, again, congrats on that partnership. I want to talk a little bit more about Blueprint. In this article I read about you back when you first started the company, you said one of your goals was to take the company public. Is that still a goal? What's changed since then?
No, we've changed, and the market's changed quite a bit. I originally had that it was more of a goal, kind of almost like a professional goal of like thinking that taking a company public was kind of almost like a rite of passage.
Like a milestone.
You've played kind of at the big level. And one of the things I've learned over the last over a decade is that whole thing is not all it's wrapped up to be, right? And a lot of companies have actually gone private just because of the nature of being able to being forced to interact with Wall Street and in a publicly traded company. It's one of the cool things about Databricks is they've actually done their latest raise without having to go public. And they were able to do a raise privately that was basically mimicked an IPO, which is awesome. It was really cool to see it. It just allows them, us having the autonomy not to have to deal with quarterly shareholder calls and deal with Wall Street expectations gives us the ability to do a lot of investment in our platforms and our services that we wouldn't normally be allowed to do because we'd have to be showing that profit on a quarterly basis. Yeah.
Yeah. I agree. I feel like I'm seeing that a lot too, where that used to be the goal, and now people are trying not to. We see that with Nordstrom and a few other companies.
Exactly. That whole publicly traded, being able to access capital through the publicly traded markets, and we believe it creates this really weird kind of imbalance or almost like a gap and the wrong motivations and incentives for companies. Mm-hmm. I always try to explain to our teams. I said, do you guys ever sit and wonder how Microsoft can put out multiple billions of dollars to do an acquisition or an investment in technology, and then in the same quarter they do layoffs?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, why does that happen? And the only reason is because they have to, regardless of what's on their balance sheet and whatever they invest in, they still have to show up in front of Wall Street and present their earnings, which is profit. Yeah. And so they, at the same time, they're putting out multiple billions of dollars, then they have to put people on the unemployment line. And it's so wonky. It's so stupid. We think it's just flat out stupid.
Yeah. Well, and you see all those TikToks too of people being like, every day I wake up and I do my job because I know what it's for. The shareholders. Like, it's all like the employee doesn't care about the shareholders,
Yeah.
Okay. Great discussion. Let's move on to the next one, which is a good old debate. So Mayor Bruce Harrell, I typically don't present news that's just a proposal. I try to wait till something has passed, but this one's just such a hot topic in the business community, and I wanted to get your take on it. But Mayor Bruce Harrell has this proposal for the city's business and occupation tax, which we were calling B&O tax, and it applies to gross revenue. So some of the highlights of the proposal is that it will eliminate it for small and medium-sized companies, and so it'll temporarily eliminate them paying those B&O taxes. To offset this,
I think it was 2 million, right?
2 million or less. Yeah. To offset this, they would increase large companies, what they have to pay in these B&O taxes, by more than 50%, which to me felt like a lot, but I do want to make sure I mention what that means. It's going from basically about 0.4% to about 0.65. So, because I think 50% can be a confusing number. The whole aim is to protect small businesses and to have larger companies pay their fair share. They're saying they're not punishing these large companies for being successful, but rather you're contributing to society who helped you get to where you are. The cons, so people that don't like it, are saying, like, yes, we love that you're cutting it for small and medium companies, but you don't need to add to the larger companies, like find it elsewhere. And if you do, then, this is going to be passed on to the consumer. I think we saw that with Grubhub and all of that, where they're like, fine, we'll pay your extra fee. We'll just pass it along. So those are kind of what I understand is the two sides. Do you have any kind of initial opinions on this?
Yeah, I do. It's an interesting kind of tax, the appropriate type of tax and the amount of tax is always a really interesting one, depending on kind of where you think philosophically. But, the B&O tax in and of itself is an interesting one because it's a representation of the privilege to be able to operate your business in a particular area, right? And it's supposed to actually represent the amount and be tied to the amount of public resources that you consume because you're in that area. It's a really interesting one though when you think about the amount of resources that a business actually consumes depending on the type of business, because they peanut butter it across every single business, right? They don't really fully understand the impact on the business and they don't really segment it based on business type. So the interesting concept also is the concept of fair share, right? Mm-hmm. Your fair share. Mm-hmm. And a flat percentage is actually really kind of almost like an even percentage is really kind of representative of the fair share. But then you can also take a look at it as, how many resources do you actually consume, and shouldn't you contribute in based on the amount of resources you're consuming? A great one is Amazon. Their revenues come from all around the world. And from a footprint standpoint, they consume relatively low amount of resources publicly. But they get massively hit with a head count tax and B&O tax, and they pay a lot of money in from a whole dollar standpoint versus a company that might have the same amount of employees but has much less revenue. They're going to pay on the same employee basis. They're going to be consuming the same amount of services in the local area, but they're going to be paying way less because their revenue is way less.
So you think it should be based on employee count? Is that what you're saying?
No, the way that they allocate, I actually think on a revenue basis, it's actually pretty appropriate on a percentage basis, because then it takes the business model out of the equation. But what I also don't think is being able to allocate. I don't think allocating a higher percentage to those larger companies just because they have the ability to pay is actually representative of either the fair share or the resources consumed.
I think I'm following, because I think you're a data guy. And what I think you're saying is, I wish we could analyze exactly how much resources are you using, and you pay that percentage. How many resources are you using, and you pay that percentage. But are you saying it's just kind of hard to measure that, because who's taking the bus? Who, you know what I mean? Is that what you mean?
Yep, yeah. Exactly. You're exactly right. You think about the transportation and trip cost, and the companies that are actually making their employees drive to work.
Right. For example.
Right? Yeah. Right. They are like consuming a lot of the highway budget and all those different things. But companies that don't and make everybody work virtual, they consume very low resources. Right.
Right. But we're not measuring it on that with this new tax, because that would be just so hard to do.
It would be really, really difficult, right?
Yeah.
So the bigger thing that I think about this, when people have this rhetoric at the politicians around kind of that fair share around the city that has helped build the business, is these type of businesses don't just grow on trees. They are, and they didn't, like a company like Amazon or a company like Microsoft or like Boeing or any of these big companies, they didn't grow up in the Seattle area because of Seattle. It just so happened that other than Bezos coming over and jumping in Seattle because of a book manufacturer was here, everybody else grew up here, including myself. And that's why we've established roots. Actually, Seattle is actually an impediment that we have to outgrow, and we have to get over a lot of the barriers that Seattle puts in place to be able to grow up big business. And so, I personally think the B&O tax should be eliminated altogether, because the bigger companies, we want to be able to keep them here as long as possible, because the ancillary benefits that they bring to being able to start up, like having the city of Seattle should take a look at all the companies that are leaving downtown. And then take a look at all the dependent businesses of restaurants and retail and all these different businesses that are going to be leaving, and they're not going to be able to benefit because all those employees and all those companies are not headquartered around downtown. You're seeing that move from Seattle to Bellevue. With the B&O tax and all the different crazy things that Seattle do, I would never move our business into Seattle.
Yeah, we should mention we are at Blueprint headquarters here in Bellevue.
In Bellevue, exactly. And I would you couldn't pay me enough money to be able to uproot our company and move it to Seattle.
Yeah. I think that's a fair argument. And I know John Scholes has been pretty outspoken. He was on the podcast from Downtown Seattle Association and saying very similar things, that it's not going to be great for the downtown if that's our goal, to keep people there. Yeah. It's an intense debate. So I encourage the listeners, please, do some research, go talk to your friends about it. I think there's a lot more to it. So yeah, it's a great discussion. We're going to move on to our next article, which is that a Seattle startup raised $15 million, and it's meant to compete with Salesforce. Salesforce bought Tableau, as you know, here, a Seattle company. And the startup is called Clarify. And what it wants to do is kind of automate the CRM. For those unfamiliar, a CRM is basically how you track, had 3 calls with this customer. This is what they said. They're a warm lead, a cold lead. It's just kind of a huge way to that's one example of how to kind of track your sales process. And a lot of times it's very cumbersome because a sales rep has to go in and type, called Sarah, her email is this, and this is this. And so their company is using shocker, AI. But they said they're different because they are building it on AI features rather than competitors like Salesforce, HubSpot, Outreach, another Seattle company, because those people are just kind of adding on AI. The CEO is Patrick Thompson, and he previously founded another company that was acquired. So for you, any comments on the CRM space? I feel like it's relatively adjacent to kind of what you do.
Yeah, definitely. When you think about AI and the way companies use AI, is you did a good description of the kind of a couple different approaches, is being able to use AI natively versus also then building it in your product versus building it on your product. Mm-hmm. And the reason why those are different is if you're doing your research and listening to a lot of the ways that companies actually describe it, is a lot of times they will talk about it as this is the way the customer wants to leverage the benefits of AI within the platform that they've built. A big portion of it is because the company doesn't want to take the time and spend the resources to be able to actually build it into the fabric of its product, right? Mm-hmm. And a big portion of it where you see the startups really disrupting this space is a big company like Salesforce. I mean, we firmly believe, they're like a dead in the water as far as they're making acquisitions that are irrelevant, and they're just trying to hang on to their the like really, really complex, convoluted contracts mm-hmm. that are really tough to get out of. And they've turned themselves into this basically legacy company that's just trying to hang on to as much business as they can. And then making a show of saying, yes, we also have AI. Mm-hmm. And a lot of these companies that are these big, massive appliances are within the next 5 years, they're going to be out of business. They're going to be dead. Mm-hmm. Because these startups that come in and say, hey, exactly the scenario that you gave is anybody that's in sales or anybody that has to interact, even like the payroll companies or anybody that interacts with a big, massive appliance application or multiple of them to do your job. One of the big portions that everybody should love about AI is just going to remove the friction around it. We actually develop a lot of AI solutions and work with companies to be able to develop AI capabilities so that they actually remove their dependencies on all those systems. So mm-hmm. I love it. I get it. Like, Salesforce is a big company, but we've hated them for a long time, mostly just because nobody can get away from them if they've signed a deal with mm-hmm. them. So they're totally proprietary and vendor lock-in, and we like more of a competitive, hey, if you're going to be really good, always earn your customers' business constantly and don't just tie them to a contract. Yeah,
no, I completely agree. And I feel like you can tell when a company or like a website, I use Squarespace for a little bit to produce my podcast. And it's like when you use a website that's not meant for that, and you're just kind of jerry-rigging it, and you can feel it. And so I switched to Captivate. But yeah, that definitely makes sense.
Yeah, we also love the Madrona folks. They always invest in really good kind of disruptive technology. So AI, the AI space is very much kind of Wild West right now, but there's a lot of companies that are doing it right and emerging to be pretty good contenders in the space. And disruption's always good for progress.
Absolutely. I want to talk a little bit about, because this article talks about how they raised the $15 million. What was it like raising money for Blueprint? Can you take us? A lot of us have not been in those pitch rooms. What was it like for you?
Yeah, so we're a little bit unique in that, like I mentioned, my background's not technical. I bought my first company in 2006 with a couple of partners, and then grew up the private equity side. So we actually did our own investing because we didn't want to go outside money.
So it was like family and friends kind of thing? Or like you went and raised it on your own without private equity?
Our own, yeah. Mostly conventional financing, and then basically our own money.
Wow.
For the founders, which is important because like anytime you go raise outside money, either with venture capital or private equity, depending on or mezzanine financing, any kind of financing, every one of those groups has a different incentive for you. And so they put a lot of pressure on you as a founder or an entrepreneur to maybe make decisions that you otherwise wouldn't make and not because it's right for the business, it's because it would be right for their fund and their return on their fund. I mean, if you think about their model, the VC model and the private equity model, they go out and raise a bunch of money from a bunch of individuals that are sitting on the sideline, and they have a horizon to be able to return that money back to them with a certain amount of return. Yep. That's it. They don't care. They do care about your business, but only if it supports that return. And so the incentives are usually misaligned. So we tried really, really hard to not go out and raise money. We've been self-funded from the start. And then we just use bank financing, which is really, really good from a flexibility standpoint.
I totally agree. It's really impressive. But speaking of private equity, isn't Pendulum Partners considered a private equity? So I know you were just kind of mentioning how they typically don't. They have different motivations. How would you describe yours as different than others?
Yeah. So the Pendulum Partner side is kind of the other half, is that we call ourselves kind of non-traditional private equity, in that a typical private equity group will come in and they'll use debt to be able to purchase either a portion or all of your company. And then what they do is right after the closing, they turn around and try to basically layer on that debt onto the company and then try to squeeze as much profit out of the company and reduce the expenses so they were able to pay that debt service, which usually hamstrings the individuals on the other side from being able to grow and make investments and do the things that you want to do normally. So we take a little bit different of approach where we don't run a fund. So we have a small set of investors that we go out to on a case by case basis and a project by project basis, and be able to actually raise money on that on a per project basis and be able to return them the return that we promise them. So it allows us a lot of flexibility to be able to do different non-traditional deals, but then also not be beholden to running the actual fund. We actually don't make money on fees, on management fees, which is usually venture capital and private equity's model. We actually make tie our return to the return that we get.
Very nice. All right, we're going to move on to the last one, which is Lululemon suing Costco. Lululemon is saying that Costco is selling a lower price duplicate of some of its popular clothing. They say that they're using the same manufacturers and they're not really being very clear to the consumer. And it's an intellectual property argument, which I always find fascinating because what constitutes intellectual property? And basically they're saying Costco's selling these products for like $20 when they usually go for like $100 on their website. The article also mentions that there was a similar legal dispute with Peloton, that Lululemon sued Peloton back in the day, but then they ended up having a partnership. So they must have rekindled. They broke up and got back together. So initial thoughts / have you dealt with any kind of IP stuff? I always find those stories interesting.
Yeah, me too. And that's the kind of the frenemies or the co-opetition that Lululemon.
Co-opetition, I like that.
That Lululemon and Peloton might have. It very much probably is it's way more effective if we work together than fight. The whole knockoff concept is really interesting, and that we usually see that. I mean, it's the biggest discussion when you think about a country like China and their perspective on the way that they deal with trade. And I always love the discussions around Nike's relationship with China, or even Microsoft's relationship with China. Anytime you move into the market, you're basically getting reverse engineered right when you step foot inside their four walls, So the concept is interesting with something like Lululemon and with Costco, and it kind of boils down to not kind of nerd out on the legal side and intellectual property side of like how much protections, if somebody invents something, how much protection should they get and for how long before somebody makes a cheaper alternative, right? And right. I don't know. I fall very much on like free market capitalism. It's, like we studied every market around the world, and the United States is the only market in the world where you can actually go from zero to hero overnight in your lifetime. Most other countries and most other societies have a cap on your ability to rise up, either because of a caste system or family barriers, political barriers, to be able to become an entrepreneur. We see it all the time in tech. And it's one of those things where we love invention. We're the only country in the world where you can really, really get a high level of invention and innovation and be able to let somebody, if you go back to kind of the Salesforce example, in most other countries, countries would give Salesforce a high level of protection so they wouldn't be disrupted by those startups. And so those startups wouldn't actually they would be prohibited from going into those markets and be able to disrupt something, because that company is very important to the country's GDP. Right. And right. So they provide a lot of regulatory barriers to protect those big monolithic companies. Here, no way. You can go like a startup can come in and take dominance over that market. And if they succeed, then the other company goes out of business and that startup succeeds. And we love everything about it, you know. So for me, I love the fact that a company like Lululemon can invent something, get some intellectual property rights around it, and then be able to go and sue a big company like Costco and say, hey, we're taking this all the way. We want a jury trial. We want to go all the way and have this be figured out because we want to protect our rights to be able to sell a high quality product, right?
Sure, but do they own leggings? I think I struggle with like, what is a dupe product, and does duping actually make the original person more innovative? And we deal with that in the event space because it's a creative space a lot. And so, you know, I kind of think if somebody's copying you, then great, I should already be on to the next thing. Or like my customer should want to be with me, even if it's the same product. There should be a lot more about my company that's better, whether it's a service or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting to talk about, does duping help or hurt a company? Does it make them more innovative? Does it take away? Are people going to just now forget Lululemon? So I wonder, you know, I guess I kind of just think about that.
A big portion is kind of the amount of investment, amount of time it took you to invent. So if you invented something and it took you 5 minutes, like, and you can recreate and move on to the next thing, that's great. But if it took you, 20 years to invent a particular drug, and you spent $1 billion on all of the trials and all of the research. We want to be able to protect that company, to incentivize them, if they're really, really good at it, to invent the next one versus the person that just comes on and do the follow on and does the easy copy, right? It's really, really easy to copy. We always fall on that you want to reward and incentivize the inventors, the people that do the complicated stuff that nobody else can do. Be able to create an environment where not only can they be protected, but they can have the lion's share of the rewards, because the person that's out there trying to do ordinary stuff and not willing to put in the work and not willing to put in the investment into themselves to actually take the risk to make the world better should not get benefited.
Yeah. I mean, I can see the other side of it. There's a lot of these smaller companies or creators, and these big companies are kind of stealing their campaigns, whether it's a marketing campaign or a product or whatever it is. And these big companies get away with it because they have so much money. So to your point, I can see how these protections are very helpful for these people who are coming up with creative ideas, because we want them to succeed too.
It's another, I mean, if you think back to the kind of the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and the electric vehicle, and what the automotive industry did to go out and buy all these inventions and lock them down and shelve them so that electric vehicles couldn't get out there on the market, right? Like that type of thing. We want to be able to protect those inventors and be able to let them be able to get incentivized to be able to go and spend all that money. The interesting thing about that is in the PSBJ, I actually published an article in the middle of the pandemic about how Washington's shutdown stance was potentially going to affect really, really negatively a lot of the entrepreneur community and the business community. And most people take into consideration a company like Lululemon and Costco. It takes a lot of effort to be able to build a business like Costco, but to build a business like Lululemon, it takes decades. But a company like that can go out of business overnight. They don't just crop up like a restaurant you can spin up in 3, 6, 9 months. If you build a manufacturing company, it takes decades to be able to spin that, to be able to grow that company up. We need to be able to protect those companies that are actually inventing products and be able to take them out there to market so that somebody just doesn't come and reverse engineer and make a next best thing,
Yeah. I appreciate your insights. I think that's like good thing to think about, especially from somebody that has a law background.
Yeah.
Well, Ryan, you've given a lot of hot takes. That was one of my potential end questions, but I feel like you've given a lot, so I appreciate that. My question for you is going to be, what do you do to get motivated when you don't feel like doing anything? Give our listeners a tip.
When you're not feeling, I mean, everybody's motivation goes up and down, and everybody has their passions. For me, if I'm not feeling motivated, especially like most of my if I have lack of motivation, it usually comes from I haven't been able to see around something, or I'm thinking in kind of the same pattern. So I play music. I have that to make sure I prioritize the creative side.
Like listen to it or play yourself?
Play. Yeah. Play in a band. And so for me, that's where I actually feel like if I'm able to actually get in, play music, or you do anything creative, right?
Sure.
Like anything creative. It might be paint, it might be writing, any of that kind of stuff, or do a podcast, right?
Yeah.
You do something creative, it'll actually unlock your brain, and you have the ability to actually then return to whatever you are with kind of a newfound sense of motivation, and then just do a lot of yoga.
I think that's really good advice. We haven't had a guest say that. So thank you so much. And Ryan Neal, Blueprint Technologies, we're here in Bellevue. Check them out. I really appreciate you hosting. I appreciate you taking the time to chat.
Yeah, really appreciate it. Thanks for taking the time.
This has been The Weekly, with production assistance from Nick Patry. If you liked what you heard, rate us and write a review on Apple Podcast or Spotify. We love listener feedback, so if you have any story suggestions, comments, or complaints, email us at info@theweeklyseattle.com. Make sure to check back next Sunday for the latest local business news. We'll see you next time.